older sister abused me my entire life. I was 4, maybe 5 years old, and I can still recall the moment it dawned on me that my older sister didn't like me. It's one of my first coherent childhood memories. I'm sitting on the carpet in the living room, engrossed in whatever toy is in my hands. My dad is somewhere in the kitchen, out of sight, but close enough that I can hear him rummaging around in drawers, or maybe putting away dishes. Then my sister, 2.5 years older than me, steps in front of me. She looks down, so I look up, and she begins whispering. Her voice is cold, low, designed so Dad can't hear. She says, I'm unloved, that I'm unwanted, that my parents wish they didn't have me. I don't recall all the exact words because I was too young to store the memory perfectly, but I remember how her tone of voice made my stomach twist, how it planted a seed of panic in my little mind. I began yelling or crying, some reflex to defend myself. So Dad rushes in, wonders why I'm making a scene. She stands behind him, wide-eyed and innocent, claiming I attacked her for no reason, and he believes her. I see that smirk spread across her face, as if to say, see, I told you no one's on your side. Even then, so early in my life, it felt like a betrayal by someone who was supposed to be my ally. She was 6 or 7 at the time, and maybe you could chalk it up to jealousy. Classic older child syndrome, resentful of the baby sister who steals the spotlight. But the problem is that it never stopped. It got worse, escalated, far beyond any typical sibling rivalry. Over the years, her cruelty became a running theme in my life, shaping how I saw myself in the world. Even as a small child, I believed every ugly word she said about me, that I was worthless, a burden, unlovable, a stain on the family. I was so impressionable, so desperate to be accepted. If you hear something over and over at a young age, especially when it's reinforced by the adult figure punishing you for your reaction, you start to take it as fact. By the time I was 11, I genuinely hated myself. I thought I was a defect. I was riddled with severe social anxiety. I became anorexic, starving my body as though the absence of food might erase me from existence, or might prove I had some form of control. My sister kept sneaking in these attacks, verbally and physically. The verbal side was subtle. She'd catch me alone, whisper the same insults, or drop new ones about how I was bringing the family down, how I'd never succeed, how everyone would be better off if I just disappeared. The physical side was more direct. Slapping, punching, scratching, grabbing me by the throat, until my vision blurred, dragging me around by my hair. And she was bigger than me, especially after my health deteriorated. At 15 I was severely underweight, stuck at around 5'4", and scrawny, while she shot up to 6'1" and overshadowed me by a good foot. Fighting back wasn't an option, and if I dared to run to my parents, it became my word against hers. I still remember how she'd do it in ways that made me react, like calling me vile names or physically tormenting me. Then the second I erupted in self-defense, she'd flip the script. If my dad or mom walked in, she'd say I'd attacked her, that I was the unhinged one. They'd see me upset or screaming, so it always looked like I was the instigator. For a long while, they labeled us as two sisters who just can't get along. They assumed it was normal teenage drama. But in reality, it was systematically orchestrated abuse from her side. Time after time, almost every day. When she started driving in high school, she'd give me rides, but that was its own nightmare. She'd intentionally blast cold air in the middle of an East Coast winter, ignoring my pleas that I was freezing. She'd trap me in that car, and the entire ride I'd endure her needling comments about what a loser I was, or how I was to blame for every family stress. Then I'd arrive at school either numb or in tears, trying to compose myself for class. I had no real safe place. Because home was shared with her, school was overshadowed by the dread of going home, and the open road was her domain in that car. My mother and father didn't fully grasp how malignant it was. They just thought, oh, you two need to be more polite to each other. Eventually my mom started to see glimpses that maybe I wasn't overreacting. She noticed how my sister's anger flared around me. She tried once to arrange for us to move to my grandmother's place, leaving my sister behind with my dad, presumably. It never happened, though. My mom, whenever she gets overwhelmed, tends to shut down. My father was in denial for the longest time, thoroughly convinced that my sister was a golden child, brilliant and charming. He'd see her laughing with him or with friends, oblivious to the monster that emerged when she was alone with me. So no real intervention occurred. The abuse went on. I sank deeper into depression, started going on those endless walks, some were 4 or 6 hours, hoping to outrun my misery or get lost in some bad neighborhood. In my darkest moments, I didn't even care if I got hurt. I wanted something drastic to happen, to end the agony I felt. That kind of suicidal ideation, though I didn't label it as such at the time, was a direct result of the constant torment. When I was 16, my father was diagnosed with cancer. My sister blamed me for stressing him out, claiming my emotional turmoil and late curfews, I was escaping the house, aggravated his condition. This put me in an impossible position. If I stayed home to keep my father from worrying, I had to endure her presence. If I left, I risked the family meltdown over me being out too late. My father ultimately recovered, but in my mind, I carried the guilt of believing I might have contributed to his illness just by existing, because that's how thoroughly my sister's manipulations had shaped me. Meanwhile, a younger brother was born when I was 6. And from day one she treated him like gold. She'd cuddle him, lavish him with affection, sometimes while shooting me a smug look, like, "See, I'm capable of love, just not for you." He was too young to grasp the dynamic, but over time, he saw how she singled me out for abuse. He'd sometimes witness her cursing me out, or physically attacking me. As he grew older, he became protective of me in small ways, though he also felt powerless. My sister tried to maintain that facade of being the perfect sibling for him, though cracks eventually formed as her narcissism grew. I didn't see her behavior as systematic abuse, or domestic violence, or any formal label, because to me, it was simply my horrible daily life. The idea that this wasn't normal never fully dawned on me until years later. People talk about siblings teasing or scuffling, but they don't talk about the extreme psychological warfare, the consistent manipulation, the actual violence that goes beyond mere fights. So I never told friends or teachers. I never dialed a hotline, partly out of fear she'd retaliate worse, partly because she'd hammered it into me that no one would believe me. My father certainly hadn't when I was small, so why would a stranger? One day, I turned 18 and fled the house. I can't remember the exact day, but I remember the rush of relief I felt packing my bags and heading off to college. I told myself, now it's over, but it wasn't truly over, because the trauma stayed with me. She'd sometimes text me or call me, still spouting hateful remarks. I tried ignoring, blocking, but we still had family events. She'd show up, make some snide remark if I was alone in a corner. The difference was that now I had partial independence and could escape physically if I wanted. At 21, I started therapy. That's when I learned how to name what happened: sibling abuse. My therapist explained that abusers often rely on stealth, ensuring no one else sees. It validated me. She said this wasn't ordinary sibling rivalry. This was methodical cruelty. That's when I confronted my parents in earnest. I told them story after story. The times she choked me, the times she'd wait until no one was looking to whisper vile insults. My father broke down sobbing, apologizing for not believing me. I'd never seen him cry like that. My mother, more subdued, said she always suspected, but was never sure how to handle it. She'd freeze, overwhelmed by the chaos, and let it keep happening. That knowledge hurt me deeply. But at least they acknowledged it now. After many emotional conversations, they said sorry, again and again. Though that doesn't erase the memories. My father in particular tries to make up for it nowadays, though I do sense the residual guilt in him. I eventually decided I'd had enough. I cut my sister out of my life. She'd already pulled away from our parents for her own reasons. Maybe she couldn't stand the fact that they were starting to see her wrongdoing. She also began treating her friends poorly, in the same narcissistic fashion, until one by one, they dropped her. That was a bittersweet validation for me, because for so long, she'd acted sweet around them and monstrous around me. Now, others got a taste of her true nature. The illusions she fed them crumbled. She ended up with no real close friends. My younger brother, who had idolized her at first, cut contact too, because as he matured, He recognized how she manipulated him. Now it's just me, my brother, and my parents trying to piece together a family dynamic that doesn't include her. I used to think I'd feel triumphant once everyone saw her for who she was. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of relief and lingering sadness. Because she's my sister, you know, we share blood and a history, albeit a dark one. Watching her alienate everyone left me both validated. Finally, others see what I endured. And mournful, we never had the bond siblings are supposed to share. I see other sisters hugging or giggling, planning their shared futures. And it stings. I wonder, what was so wrong with me that she loathed me so much? Intellectually, I realized the fault wasn't mine. She had her own twisted issues, maybe jealousy or deep insecurity. But emotionally, I sometimes can't shake the thought that if I'd been different, if I'd tried harder to please her, maybe I'd have a friend rather than an enemy. That guilt or confusion surfaces, especially when I talk about how I have no contact with her. People ask, how can you not talk to your own sister? She's family. Some assume we had normal sibling rivalries, and that I'm overreacting. But it wasn't normal. I was physically assaulted, psychologically tormented. My mental health was shattered. That's not just clashing personalities. That's systematic abuse over a decade and a half. My sister was the central figure in my nightmares, not some random neighborhood bully. She was in the same house every day. It still affects me in subtle ways. For instance, I'm hypersensitive to small criticisms from loved ones. I jump to the worst conclusion. If a friend or partner speaks in a certain tone, my sense of self-worth wavers. I always worry about being too much or burdensome. It's a direct echo of the old insults she hammered into me. I've made strides in therapy, seeing that I'm not inherently unlovable, that I didn't bring this on myself. But the scars remain. Even though she's out of my life physically, her shadow can still creep into my thoughts. The nightmares are the worst. They revolve around her reappearing, stepping back into my world unannounced, forcing me to interact with her. I'll dream that my parents invite her to a holiday gathering and insist I show up. In the dream, I can't protest. I'm expected to smile and play nice. I wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, remembering how powerless I felt as a child. My therapist says it's trauma playing out, a fear of being coerced into contact again. Because, in reality, my father does sometimes mention how he wishes we could reconcile. But he respects my boundaries. I appreciate that. At least I'm not forced to see her. But the fear that one day she might show up and pretend everything's fine is enough to set me on edge. No matter how intellectually I understand her motives, narcissism, a twisted desire for control, who knows? I still find myself baffled that she'd treat her own little sister like that. Why so much hate? So much compulsion to torment me? Was it some deeper mental health issue on her part? Did she see me as the symbol of everything wrong in her own life? I might never get an answer. She's not in a place where we can have a calm, honest conversation, and maybe it's safer that way. Part of me tries to move forward, focusing on the bonds I do have. My younger brother, my supportive parents, who at last recognize their past failures, and my friends. Yet there's a hole where the sisterly bond should be. That hole can't be filled by anyone else. Some days it's a dull ache, others it's a sharp sting, especially when I see sisterly camaraderie in media or among my peers. I remind myself that it wasn't me who chose to sabotage that relationship. From day one, I was the child under attack. I've tried letting that knowledge comfort me. It's not your fault. Even though I talk about it with a certain detachment now, the pain is still very real. I suspect it always will be. But I'm grateful I found the words, sibling abuse, discovered therapy, that made me see it wasn't normal, and had the courage to set boundaries. Now, I can define how I want to live, free from her presence. It's far from perfect. I still carry the emotional baggage, but no one is suffocating me, or strangling me, or whispering cruel, twisted messages in my ear. The best solace is forging healthy relationships that remind me how I should be treated and how I deserve to feel. My younger brother and I grew close, ironically bound by the shared experiences. He saw enough to understand, and though he was too young to help me then, He's here for me now, my father, though fraught with guilt, tries to show me love. My mother, complicated though she is, does what she can in her own anxious way. Little by little, the family dynamic is healing, minus the sister who opted out of the entire scenario by being so toxic that none of us can stand her presence. I'm at a place now where I can function day to day without always dwelling on the past. Yet, every once in a while, a random memory surfaces, or I watch sisters in a movie having fun, and I feel a pang of envy. Then I remind myself, that's not the life I had. My sister was never that person. She was an abuser. The word, abuser, sometimes catches in my throat, but it's the only label that fits. So I process the sadness, let myself mourn the relationship that never was, and keep going. Ultimately, I look forward. I might build my own family one day, children, or chosen family, or close friends, where genuine love and respect are the norm. The knowledge that I can create an environment different from the one I endured as a child gives me a sense of hope. And maybe that's the best I can do. Turn my back on the nightmare my sister caused, learn from it, and ensure it doesn't define my future.